Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Chochmat HaChodesh, where we explore Jewish time, wisdom, and practice through the Hebrew calendar. I'm your host, Yosef Lopez, and this month we turn to Adhar, the 12th and final month of our calendar cycle, but not the final episode of our podcast. We're standing at the threshold of spring. The rains of Shvat are beginning to ease. The almond trees in the land of Israel are already blooming, and the Jewish world is preparing for what is perhaps one of the most misunderstood celebrations in our tradition. And that is, of course, Purim. Adhar is a month of genuine joy. Not the performative joy of costume parties and drunken revelry that has come to define Purim and Adhar in many circles, but a dignified joy that the rabbis understood as essential to a life under the law. This month we'll explore what śimḥah, joy, actually means, how the rabbis carefully designed the mitzvot of Purim to mirror the experience of the biblical festivals, and why the Megillah occupies a place in our tradition so enduring that even in the days of the Messiah, it will never be set aside. But first, as always, let's begin with the name. Adhar. The name Adhar, spelled in Hebrew Aleph Daleth Resh, and translated as A-D-A-R or D-A-D-H-A-R, depending on how you pronounce. It appears in the Megillat Esther itself. Like most of our month's names, it was brought back from the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian month that is its cognate is Addaru, or Addaru, depending on how you pronounce your ancient Babylonian. Now that was the 12th month of their calendar cycle, and it likely derives from the Akkadian word meaning to be dark or to be clouded, referring to the overcast skies that characterize the tail end of winter, just before that seasonal shift into spring. There's a certain beauty in this. Adar is the month of darkness before renewal. The skies are still heavy, the ground's still wet from the winter storms we discussed last month in Shvat, but beneath the surface, the land is waking up. The agricultural cycle is about to turn. Nisan, the first month, the month of Aviv, of spring, is just around the corner. And this positioning matters enormously. Adar is the last month before the new year of festivals. Everything that happens in Adar, the joy, the reading of the Megillah, the communal feasting, is preparation. We are gathering ourselves physically and spiritually for the cycle that begins with Pesach and carries us through the rest of the year. It's the sort of waking up after the long winter slumber. Before we turn to Purim, there's an aspect of Adar that is largely forgotten today, and it speaks directly to the intellectual character of this month. Adar was one of the 2 months, along with Elul, designated for what was called the Yarḥei Kallah, which literally means months of the bride. You could call it a honeymoon. Yarech being literally moon, Kallah being bride. But these Yarḥei Kallot, the Yarḥei Kallah, was the greatest national assemblies of the Jewish nation and the Jewish people in Babylonia. The Kallah was an extraordinary institution, unique in the annals of intellectual history. For an entire month, scholars and students from across the Jewish world would gather at the great yeshiva for intensive study. The head of the yeshiva would assign a tractate of Talmud 5 months in advance. And when the Kallah convened, the assembled sages would study, debate, and refine the material together. This is how the Babylonian Talmud was actually produced. Now, Rabbeinu Hananel, one of our scholars of our tradition who came from North Africa, transmitted, as Rabbi Nathan ben Yechiel recorded in the Aruch, where he says as follows: Rabh Ashe ministered as head of the yeshiva for 60 years, 60, and every year he would occupy himself in the months of Elul and Adhar, the months of the Kallah. The Talmud represents 60 tractates studied over those 60 years. One tractate per Kallah session. 2 sessions per year. The entire corpus completed and then revised a second time. So when we think of Adhar, we should remember that this was not merely a month of celebration, it was a month of national intellectual assembly. The joy of Purim existed and was created within a context of serious communal study. This is worth holding in mind as we explore what śimḥah really means. We see in the Talmud, in Masechet Ta'aniyot, that it teaches the following: Min shenichnas Adar marbin mesimcha. In contradistinction to the month of Av, which we will cover later this year, where it says Mishenichnas Av ma'atin besimcha. When Av enters, we start to decrease our joy, as it says in the Mishnah, and the Talmud it flips it on its head. When the month of Adar enters, we increase in śimḥah. This is one of those phrases that everybody knows, or at least it's a popular phrase, but few truly consider, what does it actually mean to increase in śimḥah? What even is śimḥah? So let's start where we always should, with the language itself. Now, Radak, Rabbi David Kimhi, in his Sefer HaShorashim, catalogs the roots of śimḥah or sameach as shin mem het. He makes a remarkable observation. Commenting on the verse in Mishlei, Mishlei chapter 13, Pasuk 19, it says, Or sadikim yismach, the light of the righteous, yismach. So you can translate it as the light of the righteous is joyful or rejoices. What does that even mean, for light to rejoice? He writes there to clarify what the meaning of śimḥah is in this case. U'inyano ha'tosefet. Its meaning is increase, addition. Śimḥah at its root is not in an emotion in the way we typically think of emotions. It's expansion, it's growth. It is the experience of becoming more, of flourishing. Radak drives this home with a stunning Talmudic reference from Masechet Sukkah on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, on the 7th page. The first side of that page says that a large tefach, meaning we're talking about the third wall of the sukkah. In order for a sukkah to be a kasher sukkah, it has to have 3 walls. Now, not really 3 walls, 2 and a bit. So we're going to define that bit. That bit, we're going to say, is a tefach. It has to be at least a tefach. So a tefach is a handbreadth. Now, the question is, what's a handbreadth? Is a handbreadth a closed fist, or is it an open, breadth? How do we measure it? So, a large tefach is called sohek. Sohek is where we get the name Yishak. It's laughing, but it also indicates expansiveness and joy. And the small tefach, the one, the closed fist, you could say, is asev. Asev is contracted or bereaved, grieved. So we see here in Masechet Sukkah in the holiday of Sukkot, that if we remember, has a lot to deal with, interwoven joy and sorrow, life and death. We see here that sohek is laughter and joy, and atzev, contracted and grieved. Joy and sorrow in the rabbinic etymology are not merely feelings. They are states of expansion and contraction. Śimḥah is the soul expanding, atzev is the soul diminishing. Now here's where it becomes truly beautiful in my opinion. Consider the root sodi mem het, semah, as in a sprout, right? As a semah sedek, or a new bud on a branch. Radak's entry on this root concludes with the words Inyan kulan, inyan hagadol. The meaning of all of them is the concept of growth or becoming great. Both roots, sin mem hayat and sadi mem hayat, share the semantic core of expansion, increase, and flourishing. And the shin sadi interchange is well attested across the Semitic languages. And the Arabic cognate śimḥah carries meanings of generosity, expansiveness, and elevation, of being raised up. Now think about what this means for our phrase. Mishanichnas Adar marvin v'simcha. When Adar enters, we increase in expansion. We increase in flourishing. We increase in that which itself means increase. There's almost a recursive quality to it. And it's no accident that Adar falls precisely at the moment when the natural world is beginning to samach, to sprout, to push upward through the winter earth toward spring. The Purim narrative itself mirrors this movement. The story arcs from contraction to expansion, from the threat of annihilation, from Esther hiding her identity, Esther even being reflective of Hester, hidden, contracted, from a people diminished and imperiled to flourishing. The Megillah piles on the language of expansion when we say every week, at least in our family, at Havdalah, La Yehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'kar. For the Jews, there was light and simcha and gladness and honor. It overflows. It expands upon its own expansion. So simcha is not always what modern culture makes it out to be. It's not simply giddiness. It's not manic excitement of a party. In the vocabulary of the Torah and our Hachamim, simcha is the experience of flourishing, of expanding and recognition of the good that God has bestowed. And it is expressed through very particular and structured actions. We'll see it. Harambam in Hilchot Yom Tov explains what simcha looks like in practice. On the festivals, when the Torah commands us to rejoice, this rejoicing takes concrete form. It's a little stereotypical perhaps, but men drink wine, women receive new clothing or jewelry, children are given treats. And all of this takes place within the framework of the Hag of the Yom Tov, and on Purim, with the drinking of the wine and the eating of meat, at a formal meal. There's a principle that's often said in when it comes to the holidays that there is no simcha except with meat and wine. Now, point out, first off, this is not a prescription against a prescription to eat meat if you don't enjoy meat, or a requirement to drink wine if you do not imbibe wine, but that in general, simcha is sort of couched in the rabbinic mind as a simple joy of meat and wine on a holiday, which it calls to mind freedom. And it's also not a license for excess. We have a definition. Śimḥah is a dignified enjoyment of God's material blessings, shared in community or with family and with those who need it, express the act of dining together, the soul expanding in the company of others. The principle is absolutely critical for understanding how Purim is meant to be observed. But before we can appreciate the mitzvot of Purim, we need to understand the event these mitzvot commemorate. Before we discuss the mitzvot of Purim, we need to understand the Megillah itself, because it is unlike anything else in our tradition. The story of the Megillah is well known, so I won't rehearse every detail here, but consider what kind of text this is. God's name famously does not appear anywhere in the Megillah. Not once. Not anywhere in Megillat Esther is there the mention of God. There are no seas splitting, no fire descending from the heavens, no plagues reshaping empires. The miracles of the Exodus, what our tradition calls Nes Nirle, a revealed miracle, are entirely absent. Instead, the Megillah operates in the realm of Nes Nistar, the hidden miracle, where redemption unfolds through human agency and the seemingly ordinary course of events. Esther's improbable ascent to queenship, Mordechai's fortuitous discovery of an assassination plot, Ahasueros's sleepless night that leads him to review the royal chronicles at precisely the right moment. Each event taken on its own could be dismissed as coincidence, hand woven away. But taken together, they reveal the hand of Hashgacha Peratit, divine providence woven into the fabric of history. But there is a crucial point, and it is one of the deepest teachings of the Megillah. Redemption is never imposed. It must be chosen. When Mordechai sends word to Esther that she must act, he frames it in terms that should give us pause to reflect. He says, "For if you persist in keeping silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if it was precisely for a time like this that you attained royalty." Let's consider carefully what Mordechai is saying. The ultimate salvation of the Jewish people is assured. Relief and deliverance will come from another place. God's commitment to Israel is not in question. But who will be the instrument of that salvation is not predetermined. Esther has a choice. She can rise to the moment, or she can let it pass. And someone else will take her place. The divine door is open, but it is Esther who must step through it. This tension between divine orchestration and human agency runs through the entire Megillah. Hanan acts from free will, driven by hatred and ambition, yet his downfall unfolds within a pattern of divine justice that he cannot perceive. The Jewish people are saved not by a prophet's word or a miraculous sign, but by the courage of two individuals who recognized the moment and acted. And we need to understand the context in which this story unfolds. By the time of the story of Esther, Persian Jewry was deep into assimilation. When Koresh HaMashiach, or Cyrus the Great, issued his decree permitting Jews to return to Sion and rebuild our Beit HaMikdash, the vast majority did not go. See the book of Ezra and Nehemiah for that. Everyone else stayed. They were comfortable. Those who did return were likely seen by their brethren in the diaspora as extremists, as fanatics who couldn't adjust to the new reality. And then Haman's decree struck. Suddenly, all that comfort counted for nothing. The genocide made no distinction between the assimilated Jew and the observant one. And in the aftermath of their salvation, something remarkable happened. The Megillah records that the Jews, quote, confirmed and accepted upon themselves and their descendants. Kiyemu ukibelu. Hachamim in Masechet Shabbat, on Daf, page 88, side A, read this as something far more than a resolution to celebrate Purim annually. They understood it as a reaffirmation of the covenant itself, a reacceptance of the Torah. And the contrast they draw with Sinai is stunning. At Sinai, the Talmud tells us, God held the mountain over Israel kerith, like a barrel, an overwhelming canopy. The revelation was so all-encompassing, so total, that rejecting it was inconceivable. The acceptance of Torah at Sinai was compelled, in a sense, not by force, but by the sheer undeniable reality of standing in the presence of God. More on this in the month of Sivan when we get there. But in the days of Ahasuerus, there was no mountain suspended overhead, no seas had been split, no fire descended. There was only history, messy, ambiguous, unfolding in a natural order. And within that natural order, the Jewish people perceived God's hand and chose freely and voluntarily to reaffirm their covenant. This acceptance was, in a certain sense, more complete than at Sinai itself, because it was entirely volitional without any external signs. It was born not from overwhelming revelation, but from historical consciousness and the capacity to see God's providence hidden within the ordinary flow of events. This is why the Megillah is not merely a historical record. It is a mirror of the Jewish condition across generations. It portrays Jewish existence as it actually is for most of our history, without open miracles, without Nevi'im, prophets, in lands that are not our own, navigating the complexities of empire, and yet perceiving God's hand in the unfolding events and choosing to act at the right time. Now, Purim is not a festival ordained by the Torah. Surely the Torah was given many years before the Jews were ever set foot in Persia. It is a rabbinically ordained institution. And Kriyat HaMegillah is, in fact, the first mitzvah established solely by rabbinic authority. We'll return to what that means shortly, but for now, notice what the rabbis did with this authority. They were remarkably deliberate in how they designed the mitzvot. They built Purim to mirror the structure of the biblical festivals, to create an experience that carries the weight and emotional reality of a Yom Tov, a holiday, even though it formally isn't one. Much like Hanukkah, it's a commemoration of a historical event. So let's consider what they instituted. First, the reading of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, a public communal recitation or private, depending on how you do it, but most likely public communal recitation that gathers the entire community, as we can see as mentioned in the laws of Megillah Hanukkah. Second, we have the Seudat Purim, which is a festive meal, because just as we discussed, Simcha requires some sort of action that expresses that joy. And here it's with meat and wine, just as on Yom Tov. Third, we have Mishloach Manoth. Mishloach Manoth is sending portions of food to friends and neighbors. It strengthens our communal bonds through the sharing of our meal. And it has an echo of the communal sacrifices and shared eating that characterize the temple festivals. And fourth, we have Matnot le'evyonim, the gifts to the poor, because true joy cannot exist when members of our community are in want. On the festivals, the Torah explicitly commands us not to forget the Levite, the stranger, the orphan, the widow. And Purim mirrors this through Matanot le'evyonim. Harambam states explicitly that one should prioritize Matanot le'evyonim over Mishloach Manot, and even over the Seudah itself. Because, and this is a remarkable statement, there is no greater or more beautiful joy than gladdening the hearts of the poor, the orphans, the widows, and the strangers. One who gladdens the heart of the unfortunate, says Harambam, resembles the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So do we see the architecture of the Hachamim developed here? The rabbis took the emotional and halachic framework of the Torah's built-in festivals, and they designed Purim inside it. The mitzvot of Purim aren't arbitrary customs. They are carefully considered legal structure designed to create and to facilitate genuine simcha, not a pale imitation of festival joy, but a full experience of it. Now, however, this brings us to the question that often dominates popular conversation about Purim, and that is drinking. The Talmud records the statement that a person should drink on Purim ad that one should drink until they cannot tell the difference or between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai. Now, this statement has been used to justify and even celebrate extreme drunkenness on Purim. But like everything in Jewish law, context matters. The drinking on Purim takes place not abstractly, but within the Seudah, the formal festive meal. It is part of the same framework we just described. Ein simcha ella b'basar v'yayin. Wine is consumed as part of our dignified meal in the same manner as on Yom Tov. It's not a prescription for binge drinking at a costume party. Harambam codifies that one should drink wine at Seudat Purim. The drinking is part of the Seudah. It belongs to the meal, to the table, to the company of others. It is an expression of śimḥah in the way we have defined it, a soul expanding in gratitude and fellowship. It's not an end unto itself, and it is certainly not a license for the kind of public drunkenness that has overtaken Purim in some communities. The difference between authentic śimḥah and its distortion is precisely the difference between haruth, which we are going to call liberty under the law, and the wanton freedom of lawlessness. Next month, when we turn to Nisan and the Haggadah and what we call the Seder, we'll explore this idea more fully, where the 4 cups of wine are drunk in a way of haruth, not in dissipation and debauchery, but in the manner of free people. And here Purim is no exception. The wine at the Seudah is an expression of dignity, not its abandonment. Now let's turn to the Megillah itself as a text, how it entered our tradition and how it is read, because both reveal something essential about what Purim represents. The Megillah was not imposed from above. The Talmud Yerushalmi records a remarkable debate amongst the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish Supreme Court, the elders and prophets at the time, who initially hesitated, and this was early on. Purim, Mordechai was a member of the Anshei Knesset Gedolah, and they hesitate to accept Purim as a permanent festival. Their concern is a principled concern. Could a new obligation be added to Jewish practice after the Torah had been given? No prophet after Moshe has the authority to introduce new commandments. So the matter remained unresolved until, as the Yerushalmi puts it, God enlightened their eyes, and they perceived that Purim was actually already alluded to in the Torah, and in the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, and the obligation wasn't new, it had been latent within the tradition all along, just waiting to be recognized. Now, intertwined with this question was another more fundamental debate. Was Megillat Esther nitneh lekatev, which means that it's a fully consigned piece of our canon, it's meant for writing, or was it nemera likor'oth velo nemera lekatev? It's just something that we use to commemorate the holiday, but it's not a part of our canon altogether. Now, Hacham Yosef Or, he explains, drawing on the model of Persian chancelleries, this was not merely a technical or textual question. It was a question about Jewish self-definition and exile. Unlike the prophetic books, which record direct revelation from God Almighty, the Megillah represents the moment when Jewish survival depended not on prophecy, but on communal initiative, on the capacity of the people and their hachamim to perceive, legislate, and act. The debate about whether the Megillah was written or merely read reflects this transition. The transition from a Judaism centered on prophetic revelation to a Judaism sustained by halakha and rabbinic authority and innovation. The Megillah, one might say, is the founding document of Galuth Judaism, of a people learning to navigate history without explicit divine intervention, without the direction of a prophet, yet still perceiving God's presence in unfolding events. There was a significant debate in Talmudic times between two great masters, Rav and Shemuel, about the formal status of the Megillah. Is it a formally published sefer, a book, part of our canon, with all the textual authority that it implies? Or are we going to simply recognize it as an igereth? Igereth is an epistle, a royal communique, a letter. Rav held that Esther had the full status of a book. It had been certified by the earthly authorities and approved in heaven, so to speak. Shmuel and the Academy of Nahar De'ah, where he presided, held that Esther was published as an igereth, following the model of Persian legal or royal decrees, where official memoranda were delivered orally by heralds reading from the written letters. Think someone pulling up into the town square, unfurling a scroll, hear ye, hear ye. In rabbinic terminology, this meant the text was pronounced for reading, but it was not pronounced for writing. It was meant to be heard, but not studied as a text in the way one studies a book of scripture. So what does that all mean? It has practical consequences. Communities that followed Shemuel's view read the Megillah in the style of heralds. So once upon a time, They would sit there and they'd open up the Megillah and then say, they wouldn't actually be adding the ta'amim. No traditional cantillation was used for reading this. Now, the current practice, how Rambam codifies it, is to recognize that the text of Esther has a status of a sefer. It's part of our official canon. It was deposited and all that, but that we're not entirely precise with the reading. We treat it as a scripture in substance, but deliver it as a proclamation in style, and for us that means that we let the scroll unfurl as we read it to show that it is sort of being read as a letter. This tells us something important. Purim is at its heart a public announcement. The reading of the Megillah is a testimony of sorts for the public. It's not a text that is being read to discharge some sort of communal obligation to hear the text like the Torah is. This is something to be declared and to recognize, because this is a declaration of what happened to us and how we survived. It is read out loud as a royal decree, because this is exactly what it is, a proclamation of Jewish survival. What may be the most remarkable statement in Rambam's laws of Megillah and Hanukkah. It is the very last halakha in the section, and it is the kind of conclusion that makes you rethink everything that came before. Rambam writes, כל ספרי הנביאים בכל כתובים עתידן לבטל ימות המשיח חוץ Megillat Esther. All the books of the prophets and all the writings are destined to be annulled in the days of the Messiah, except for Megillat Esther. הרי היא קיימת כחמישה חומשי תורה וההלכות של התורה שבעל פה שאינן בטלים לעולם. It will endure like the 5 books of the Torah and like the halachot of the oral law, which are never annulled. ואף על פי שכל זיכרון הצורות יבטל, שנאמר כי נשכחו הצרות הראשונות. And even though all memory of the national troubles will be annulled, as is said, for the former troubles will be forgotten, and they'll be hidden from my eyes. ימי הפורים לא יבטלו, שנאמר, וימי הפורים האלה לא יעברו מתוך היהודים, וזרעם לא יעשו מזרעם. The days of Purim will not be annulled, as it is said, and these days of Purim shall not pass from among the Jews, and their memory shall not cease from their descendants. This teaching originates in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Mesachet Megillah, I believe, where Rabbi Yohanan states that all the Nevi'im Ketuvim will be annulled in the future. But the Hamishim Torah will not. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, known as Reish Lakish, he adds also Megillat Esther and the halachot will not be annulled. He draws a verbal connection. This is one of the 13 principles we call a gezerah shawa, between a verse where it says, a great voice did not cease, that's in Devarim, speaking of the Torah at Sinai, meaning that there was a great voice coming from Sinai, and the verse in Esther chapter 9 where it says, and their memory did not cease from their descendants. He makes a connection between the two. The Megillah is linked to Sinai itself, as we mentioned above earlier. So let's try to sit with this for just a moment and understand. In the Messianic age, the utopian future that Judaism envisions, the Nevi'im will no longer serve the same function because prophecy itself will have returned. Right? It's not that the books become irrelevant or that they're old and we need new things. No, it's just that we have prophecy back. Yeshaya, like in our present condition, when prophecy is dormant, we rely on the great prophets of old, especially Yeshaya, Yeremiah, Yehezkel, the canonized prophets of our tradition, out of thousands of prophets, to guide us with their wisdom and insight. But when prophecy is restored, we'll have direct communication again. Their words will have been sort of fulfilled, and living prophets will walk among us. And same thing for the Ketuvim, the Psalms, the wisdom literature. They won't be discarded as being pointless, but with the return of the Beit HaMikdash and Ruach HaKodesh, Israel will compose, as it says in Tehillim, Shira Hadasha, new songs, new poetry, new wisdom flowing from renewed inspiration. Right now, we're basically listening to oldies whenever we sing the Tehillim. All memory of national suffering will fade as well. However, doesn't Purim commemorate national suffering? Why does Purim remain? Purim remains. The Megillah endures alongside the Torah itself. Why? So I want to suggest three reasons, and they build upon one another. Firstly, the Megillah teaches us to perceive God's providence in galut, in exile. Unlike any other book, unlike most of the other books of Mikra, the Megillah takes place entirely outside of the corpus of Eretz Israel and Am Yisrael. We're in a foreign place, in a period when prophecy had waned. God's name is never mentioned, yet the Hachamim perceived his hand in seemingly mundane events of the narrative. The Megillah teaches that redemption in exile does not come through supernatural intervention, but through recognizing divine providence in the everyday. This is a lesson that never expires. Secondly, and we touched on this earlier, the Megillah marks a transition from prophetic to halachic Judaism. The obligation of Kiryat HaMegillah is a mitzvah established solely by rabbinic authority, yet it is treated with the permanence akin to Torah law. Think about what that means. Before Purim, the mitzvot of Israel came through the Torah and the prophets, through direct revelation from Borei Olam, the creator of the world. After Purim, in a world without prophecy and without centralized authority, the interpretation of the Hamim became the foundation of Jewish continuity. Purim endures because it represents the very mechanism by which Judaism survived. The capacity of the rabbis to legislate, to build, to preserve the covenant through adaptation and law. Every rabbinic enactment that has sustained a Jewish life for 2 millennia traces its legitimacy back to this moment. And third, and this is perhaps the biggest point, the Megillah represents a model of Geulah, of redemption, that does not rely on supernatural intervention. The Jewish people's salvation was achieved through human initiative, through Esther's courage and Mordechai's political acumen. And this aligns precisely with Rambam's vision of Yomot HaMashiach, the Messianic age, which is not defined by supernatural miracles, but by a restored Jewish sovereignty, operating within the quote-unquote natural order. Consider the implications of that. When prophecy returns and the Bayith is rebuilt, the Nevi'im and Ketuvim will yield to living revelation and fresh composition, not to displace Torah, to reinforce it. But the Megillah will still be necessary because the model of redemption it presents is the model of our future redemption itself. Even in Rambam's Messianic age, the world will operate according to its natural course. There will be no suspension of the laws of nature. And Jewish survival will still depend on what it has always depended on: perceiving the moment, acting with courage, and choosing to step through the doors that God opens for us. It might go against some of the optimistic views, but I don't think this is a pessimistic teaching. I believe it's a realistic one. Even in the most utopian vision of the future, the memory of genocidal hatred and the courage required to stand against it must never be allowed to fade. This takes Purim out of a quaint folk holiday. It is a permanent institution for the defense of Jewish survival. Its mitzvot, like the reading of the Megillah, the communal feasting, caring for the poor, and strengthening the bonds between neighbors, they're not merely commemorative acts that we replay because they're mentioned in the Megillah. They are the social infrastructure of a people that knows it must hold together if it wants to survive. And as Adar comes and goes, we find ourselves standing on the precipice of a new year, a new Jewish year. Nisan, the first month, is coming. With it comes the first festival in the annual cycle, Pesach, and the great renewal of spring. The rabbis placed Purim here deliberately. Just before the cycle of festivals begins anew, we are reminded of why we need that cycle in the first place. The festivals celebrate our freedom under the Torah, which we call Herut. And Purim reminds us that this freedom might come with a price, and it must be defended at a price in every generation. In Israel now, the almond trees are blooming, the rain's slowing down, the land is preparing to bring forth the new life growing underneath, and we, gathering around the Nigila, gathering around the Seudah, sending food to our neighbors and gifts to those in need, are preparing too for the year ahead, for the festivals ahead, for whatever may come. Adar teaches us that joy is not frivolity. Joy gives us strength for discipline, and it becomes communal expression of gratitude for our survival. The śimḥah of Adar is not a holiday from seriousness. It is seriousness in its highest form. The recognition that we are still here, that we are still together, and that there is still much work to do. The Megillah teaches us that God may open the door, but it is we who must step through. That was true for Esther and Shushan. It is true for us today. Mi shenichnas Adar marbim śimḥah. When Adar enters, we increase in joy. Real joy. The joy of a people that perceives God's hand in the ordinary course and chooses to act with dignity, with generosity, and with wine shared at a set table. Next month, Nisan, the new year of festivals, the month of Aviv, the season of our Haruth. We'll see you there. I want to thank you all for listening. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can find us on Patreon under Horizontal Media, where your generosity helps sustain the kind of Torah scholarship that has always been supported by the community. And in the tradition of the great academies during the Yarḥei Kallah, where communities sustain their scholarship so that learning could flourish, your contributions make this work possible. Until next time, al vermos, Chodesh Tov u'Mevorach, Aleinu ve'alach, Purim Allegre.